Hello, everyone. Welcome to our monthly NJBIA Sales and Marketing Roundtable, where I will hand the mic to the fabulous Kate Conroy to tell us what's going on at NJBIA.
Thank you so much and good afternoon, everyone. We are thrilled to have helped in the creation of this amazing group led by such amazing women. For those of you who are new to NJBIA, we are the largest statewide business association in the country, representing about 1 million jobs in the state of New Jersey, which is approximately 1/4 of all of New Jersey's employees. We offer customer development opportunities, visibility through events, magazine ads, or our podcast and TV shows, and money-saving discounts on stuff you're probably already paying for, like payroll, healthcare, a 401k solution, and 24/7 HR support. I am Kate Conroy, and if you're interested in more info on us, I'll drop the website into the chat along with my contact info. Feel free to be in touch and we can get you whatever you need. And with that, I will turn it back to the wonderful, marvelous Donna Miller.
Oh my goodness, why thank you, Kate Conroy, and welcome all of you today. I am Donna Miller. I am Chief Visionary Officer at C3 Workplace, where for the last 27 years, we have been helping companies to start and grow by providing on-demand office space, all kinds of back office support, and consulting around how to make all those operational and financial and marketing systems work together. I personally now spend all my time as a business growth consultant. So if you're struggling to get from where you are to where you want to be, let's have a conversation, no pressure. Maybe there's a way that we can help each other. So a few things for today. This event is being recorded. You are all muted. We have a big crowd as usual. So we will have time at the end of the presentation for questions. I'm going to ask you to please use the Q&A versus the chat. It gets a little unwieldy when you have this many people. So also with that said, before we get into our content, I would like to thank our sponsors. You know, you can't take an army to do these events, so we want to thank our sponsors. Sandler, Sales and Management Training have been part of our program from the beginning. And here at Sales and Marketing Roundtable, we talk a lot about ways to fill your funnel. But in my humble opinion, and I think Rachel might back me on this one, increasing your close ratio is probably the single most effective way that you can improve your bottom line. And if you agree, I encourage you to talk to Cal Thomas about Sandler Sales and Management Training. All three of us, me, Rachel, and Kate, are all Sandler clients and raving fans because it works. And Sandler is also having a complimentary session. I'll drop the link to that in the chat window once I'm finished with these intros. And also allow me to introduce you to DeTorres and DeGeorge Family Law. If your New Year's resolution was to never spend another holiday with your current spouse, A, you're not alone, and B, you need to talk to Roseanne DeTorres from DeTorres and DeGeorge. They take an iron fist in a velvet glove approach to divorce, resulting in 99% of their cases are settled without going to court. Big thing. And if you own a business, I know many of you do, really important to talk to a family law attorney if you're thinking about making some changes. And ready? No. Just making sure you're all awake. Okay, join me in welcoming our newest collaborator, Kim Luthi. Kim is a certified financial planner with 33 years experience. We all know change is the only constant, and frankly, in the last 2 years, we've all had more than we really wanted. But Kim gets this. She's a walking testimonial to all the things that can potentially derail your life. She takes all that life experience, combines it with her exceptional credentials to help you plan for a secure future in a thoughtful and compassionate way. I know she's on here and you all can drop your details in the chat window, but contact Kim today to analyze your financial options. So thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to NJBIA. And February, I will drop the registration to our February event where we have Steve Wiedemann, and we will be talking about impactful SEO strategies. You don't want to miss that. So thank you, and I'm going to now hand the mic. I'm going to leave the stage and hand the mic to Rachel.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to see our first roundtable of the new year, and we're going to kick it off right. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rachel Durkin. My company is Paradigm Marketing and Design. We are a web branding and marketing agency specializing in working with clients with a complex sale. So if you have a sales team and a small marketing team that is probably overworked, or no marketing team at all, and you want to help your sales team shorten the number of meetings they're having and increasing their close rate, we can help you. I am so excited to introduce our guest today. I am a big fan of this man because he's all things messaging. And in fact, and I like to say I'm pretty good at messaging. I'm taking his course, and I have many of my employees also taking his course, and he's got some really great things to say. So a few months ago, last quarter of 2021, he came on and did a roundtable with us, and it was wildly popular. He talked about the structure, how to build the structure of your message. And we got so much resounding positive feedback, and actually not just requests, but demands that he come back and talk about more, because he touched upon some additional ways to go deeper in that topic, that Tim has graciously agreed, even though he's very busy, to come back and dive in on that message and talk about how to build your value proposition and how to make it as impactful as possible in a virtual world. I'm having a hard time speaking today. Maybe Tim can help me with that. So please help me in welcoming Tim Pollard from Radium. And Tim has done messaging for all the big boys and the small guys as well. So you might have heard some of his clients of Disney or IBM or Salesforce, where he's helped them create a structured either sales message or value proposition. And he's here today to give us his knowledge. One last thing I'll say before I hand it over to him is that we did send out a handout to everybody before this event. We encourage you to download that, and if you can, print it, because it'll be tremendously helpful as Tim's going over today, but we're also dropping it in the chat. So Tim, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it, and I'm very excited to hear what you have to say today.
Cool. Thank you very much, Rachel. It's a pleasure to be back. It's nice to have the opportunity to unpack some of the themes we first discussed at the end of last year. I think we're in an unbelievably interesting and challenging time as we think about sales, particularly in the B2B space, and especially this challenge of messaging in a virtual environment. We have a relatively ambitious agenda today, because what I want to do is interweave a few different themes. I know a lot of people on the call today were not on the previous call, so I do want to do a recap of what are the critical principles you have to understand and implement in terms of getting your sales message right. But then the other thing I was asked to come back, it was to come back and go one layer deeper in terms of practicality on value proposition design. And by the way, there's really no essential difference between a value proposition and a sales message. They're the same thing. So what I want to talk in the second half is about the altitude at which sales messages or value propositions exist, and give you a tool to actually help you develop one. A couple of times Donna referenced it, and Rachel, this concept of close rate. What is our effectiveness rate when we get in front of the customer? I'm going to unashamedly say the single most powerful lever to impacting close rate is the quality of your sales message. If you cannot tell a good story about your solution, you will fail more often than you succeed. And when I look at some of our clients, I look at some of the increases in close rates. Not uncommon to see a 15 go to a 30, a 25 to a 60. I would challenge anyone to name a different kind of activity they could work on that would yield those kinds of results. So if you really want to improve your close rate, there are a lot of things you can do, but fixing your messaging is primary. So I'm going to move fairly briskly. Potentially we can take questions, or we'll do some kind of fireside chat afterwards. And as Rachel said, I really encourage you to download and print that handout. If you split screen and try and do both, you'll actually not be able to engage properly with either of them. So if you can print it, that would be good. I'm going to start with this first page here. And I want to back up and talk about the challenge of messaging. I'm going to move very briskly, but you should be able to follow me. The very top left, you see a bar chart, and it's very simple context. If you look at most companies and you ask them how good is the solution you offer your marketplace, they're pretty confident that it is good, an 8.1 out of 10. I think that's completely realistic. Companies do tend, not all of them, to build good solutions. But then when you ask them a second question, which is how well do you tell the story of that solution when you're in front of the customer, the number plummets. 3.9 out of 10 is an average. That number gets even lower when companies are in a more technical space. And the problem isn't PowerPoint. You should never probably use PowerPoint for reasons that I may get into later on. But the problem is, we build these very dense, bloated decks, and I think we can instinctively look at this and say there's got to be a better way of doing that than that. Now, what is the problem? The problem, as I said, is not PowerPoint. The problem, if you look on the upper right of the page, is that almost all messaging is paralyzed by three very common mistakes. First, TMI. We pack far too much in. We are wildly overambitious in terms of how much we can cover. We want to be thorough, we want to be complete, but we end up being stupid. We make them so dense that no human being could possibly track with the argument. The second problem of almost all messaging, it's just thoroughly confusing. It's just not clear. So I want to put there, the value is unclear. Like, yeah, I think I understood most of the words, but why exactly should I be super interested in this? And this is often because we get very technical, we pack too much in, we tend to build stories with a poor narrative flow, and they jump around between topics, and people just very quickly are just like, I'm just not getting it. And then the third problem, which shows up again almost constantly, and is one of, if not arguably the most toxic of all, is that we are just so fundamentally sender oriented. I review 100 decks a year at least from big clients with departments that build messaging, sales enablement. And it's just slide after slide of that. Who we are, what we do, how we got started, where our buildings are, how many awards we won, how our product works, features and functions, feeds and speeds. Customer could not be less interested in that, certainly early in a sales pursuit. So we make these repeated mistakes, and what happens is they yield two very bad outcomes. The first outcome, and all of you have seen this, is to some extent, your messaging simply is not compelling enough. Yeah, you win sometimes, particularly if a good salesperson navigates their way around the story a little bit, but you lose more than you should. And you leave a meeting and like, it went okay, but man, it could have gone so much better. And that deck is sort of like hanging around your neck like an albatross. The second problem though, and you would think there would not be a more serious problem than your messaging being uncompelling. In fact, I would argue the second problem is more serious, which is the real reason it's failing is it's failing the test of retellability. Now, of everything I'm going to say today, this next 3 minutes is perhaps the most vital. How does all communication work, and especially sales communication? This is you, and for the sake of simplicity, you're having a one-on-one conversation with a customer. Is that meeting important? Yes. Is that the most important meeting? No, it's never the most important meeting. Why? Because the decision isn't made here, and the decision isn't made by this individual. As you know, sometime later, let's call this person Rachel, sometime later, Rachel is in another meeting, and it's a meeting you don't get to be invited to, and it's the meeting where this shadowy sort of decision-making body of the customer is going to make that decision about whether to go with your solution or not. Are they going to go with you versus a competitor, you versus do nothing? It's the same thing. And the quality of the sale, the quality of your success of your outcomes are not primarily here driven by how well the first meeting went. It's driven by how well this meeting goes. Can Rachel effectively retell your story? She may be really excited about the solution and want to advocate for you. So it's not a question of motivation, it's a question of ability. Can she or he obviously actually retell your story effectively? And the single ultimately biggest problem with most messaging is it utterly fails the retellability test. You wouldn't even try to retell decks and stories like the typical ones that are out there. This has three important implications, this concept of retellability. One is if you know your messaging is kind of weak here, the meetings are going okay, but not great, you can be absolutely certain that it's failing catastrophically here in the second meeting. And by the way, there's very good recent research. These buying groups, they spend 83% of their time meeting among themselves and only 17% of their time meeting with salespeople. And that's a growing trend that these groups tend to work more independent of the sellers that talk to them. So retellability becomes absolutely critical. Now, why is this true? If it's weak here, it's failing here, because you're not there to help it. I could be given a pretty crappy deck and I'd find a way to make it work. Good sellers do this. Somebody gives them a deck, or they don't have time to build a good one, and they navigate, they navigate around it. They maybe go off script, they ignore some slides, they resequence it, they use the ones they like, blah, blah, blah. That's great, but Rachel can't do that, because a seller would take a long time to learn how to do that. And so that inability, or you not being in the second meeting, makes it almost impossible for that story to go well, because you're not there to help it. The second thing this means is the standard for sales messaging has to be rethought. The standard for a sales message is not that it succeeds in the first meeting. The standard for a sales message has to be second meeting success. And that changes the way we should think about messaging. I don't build messages with or for clients to have great first meetings. I build messages for clients to make sure that story can be effectively retold and have great second meetings, because obviously, if you achieve this, by definition, you achieve this. And then thirdly, I think this changes the way you think about the nature and purpose of a sales message. Is it the purpose of a sales message to persuade? Yes, of course it is. My job is to persuade, in this case, Rachel, that our solution is worth considering and taking forward. Is that the only role of the message? No, the message has also to equip Rachel. And the reason that's such a profound thought is nobody does this. I could quite literally talk to 1,000 sales leaders and say, do you build messaging to be persuasive, to persuade? And they'll say yes. And if I said, do you build messaging to equip? They'll say, no, I've never even thought about that, in fact. This changes the way we build communication. I can't just build a message that persuades Rachel, like, okay, this is a great solution. I have to build it in so crisp, so clean, so compelling, so clear, that kind of in one sitting, she can learn it and is then able to retell it, which is a completely different standard, completely different set of governing principles than would get you to this kind of rubbish, the typical PowerPoint message. So this is the fundamental mistake that almost all companies make in some measure. Now, before it gets better, it gets worse, because second theme of our day, we now all have to do this in a virtual world. There's no way this is going away. Yes, some meetings will come back and be live, but the overwhelming majority of sales meetings will almost certainly remain virtual. There's just too many efficiencies to be gained. And the interesting thing in the virtual environment is that we all tend to think the challenge is simply one of managing the platform. Look at the page there, Bryce, maybe we could bring that up. Bring up the witness protection slide, as we call it. Very simple mistakes that people still make. Our training takes 10 minutes to teach you how to use the platform properly. But there's a classic example of a customer in a room where they've been backlit, and you just can't see them. It's a very unprofessional look. Now, they're the customer. It doesn't matter what they look like, but if the seller was doing that, it's just a very unprofessional look. But here's the thing. The real issue is not the platform. That's arguably the simplest thing to solve for. The real issue is way more interesting than that. Selling, as you know, is virtually unique in the professions for being a very social process. It's this delicate ballet between buyer and seller, move, counter move, proposition, objection, handling of objection. And what happens in the virtual world is essentially it moves into an asocial environment. In other words, an environment with much different and in fact much narrower social dynamics. And the problem is, how do you conduct a social interaction in an asocial environment? I mean, at the extreme, it's this. I'm in a film studio. I have a pane of glass in front of me that I'm writing on, and the camera flips the image, by the way. I'm not a witch. And then there's a camera over there, and I have no interaction with you. Now, obviously, this isn't a sales conversation, but it's still a loss to me to not be able to gauge and read your response. And in a sales meeting, that's particularly toxic. And the particular social dynamics that change that you want to be aware of, there are 3 of them, and they're on your page. The first one is you're now going to be dealing in the virtual environment with a very high level of customer distraction. How many of you already in the last 12 minutes have checked another piece of technology? Probably most of you. And you can do that, it's up to you, but you are affecting your ability to learn when you do that, and the customers do the same. Now, I want you to think about this. If you're already developing a value story that's confusing and technical and poorly sequenced, in other words, very hard to follow and understand, how on earth can that work if a customer is then significantly more distracted than they would be in a live environment? The second problem is a loss of mental bandwidth. We have to focus so intently, this is well proven now scientifically, we have to focus so intently in a virtual world, so much harder than we do in a live meeting, that it drains our mental batteries very quickly. You catch the customer at the tail end of a day where they've had 5 Zoom meetings, there's not much gas left in the tank. So again, hyperlink here, if you're already tending to present too much information and that information is confusing, how is that going to work when the customer's working with so much less mental bandwidth? You see, what's really happening here is the virtual environment is going to amplify the impact of your messaging mistakes. And then the third one, which to me is the most interesting, not the most important, is kind of what I described earlier. A loss of feedback or social cues. All sales presentations are conversations. It's vital that I know how the customer's responding to what I'm saying, and that I'm able then to navigate and adjust, either leaning in onto their enthusiasm or dealing with an objection or something like that. And what happens when you lose those cues, so it's a virtual meeting, you're making the mistake of presenting slides, the slides are on screen, it's just like one of these awful sort of narrated, PowerPoint karaoke trainings, that's a complete end of dialogue, and that's where sales go to die. So the challenge we have to resolve here is to deal with these problems, solve these problems, but also solve them so well that we mitigate the narrower social environment. And that's what we do. We teach people how to build messaging that will work in a live or virtual environment, completely resolve these problems, and allow them then to see this hopefully breakthrough results in their close rates, almost regardless of what else is going on in terms of medium and so forth. Now, how do you do that? Well, what I want to do is I want to drift over to another part of the studio and walk you through the fundamental principles of getting messaging right. Then I'm going to come back and talk a little bit more specifically about how you build it. So let's look at what it is, and then let's come back and look at how you do it. Great. So you see on your page here that earlier I described for you these 3 very toxic hallmarks of getting messaging wrong. What I want to do very briefly is walk you through what does getting it right look like. And this little graphic at the bottom of your page, the one that surrounds this message, you can really use this as a checklist. Now, obviously, you don't have all the tools here. I would encourage you to think about the deeper training, because it's not quite as easy to do as it looks. But here, at least, I can show you what it should look like. So your message should have 7 hallmarks. The first one, really crisp and clean and simple. There is decades-old evidence of the brain's bandwidth limitations. You cannot take in all the information that's presented to you. So when somebody presents this massive information, you hit overload far more quickly than you think you do. So what you're looking for is messaging that's very crisp and clean and simple. This is some messaging, funny enough, for the WebEx platform, Cisco's platform. This was a 50, 60 slide deck, boiled down to a 4-panel narrative. And in our view, any story can be told within that boundary, and customers absolutely love it. They will often comment on the respectfulness of the seller to do the hard work of boiling their story. In fact, some work we've been doing with IBM recently, they've been boiling to 1 page, often because customers would be printing this document at home. And that can absolutely be done. So the first one, really crisp, clean, and simple. Is that possible? Yes, it's 100% about self-discipline. We tell bloated stories because we don't have the discipline to tell a narrow story. And if you need an appendix document or something like that, in fact, let me just grab one of those. For this message, which is a message we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today, It's an advanced lighting solution for hospitals. One of the reasons this can be so synthesized and concise is that this is a big appendix that covers all of the sort of background supplementary material you might need. The second hallmark is it has to be deeply rooted in a customer problem. This is extraordinarily important, and we're starting now to get into the nature of a value proposition, which I'm going to get into deeper later on. You cannot build a message around you. You build a message around a customer problem that you solve. I love this for the WebEx message. It doesn't say, welcome to WebEx 4.0. What it says is, with so many tools to communicate, why do your global teams still feel so disconnected? What a great provocative question. This is a C-level conversation. A CIO of a large bank is really interested in that question. Why are my people still feel disconnected? They're not interested in WebEx. So you want to lean in on the customer's problem, take time on it. Typically, you want to spend at least 1/3 of your time on the problem to generate engagement and also to generate a commitment to act. Customer does not perceive the problem as serious. They will not act. No matter how good your solution is, it doesn't matter. Action derives from a sense of gravity of the problem, not from the quality of the solution. Third hallmark, and this is where we get essentially into your value proposition, your proposition of your ability to solve a problem. And the main thing I want to say about this is a value proposition should always be expressed as a small number of big ideas. Now, that's not just cute. The reason we do this is that that is the way the brain works. The human brain traffics in ideas. If you were, somebody asked you this afternoon what this workshop was about, you wouldn't replay a recording of it. You don't have one, not in your brain at least. What you would say is, it was really interesting. He talked about the social narrowing of the virtual environment. He talked about how critical retellability is. Do you see what you're doing? You're boiling this narrative into a small number of ideas. That's how the brain stores information. So it obviously then, what a great communicator does is feed the brain what it's looking for, which is big ideas. So you would always want to express your value through the lens of a small number of ideas. In fact, they show up sort of as chapters. You can't read these, but this is the problem statement. These are 3 big ideas of why Cisco's solution is superior to any other. And these big ideas essentially appear as sort of chapter titles. The fourth hallmark is they need to be powerfully supported, these ideas. You want the ideas to be memorable. And actually, Bryce, I think we can very quickly show the poppies example. Let me explain. Imagine I had an idea I wanted to express. The number of how awful the loss of life was for Britain in World War I. I could show it this way: 888,246 deaths. Is that accurate? Absolutely, it is. Is it powerful and memorable? Absolutely not. The moment I take that down, you'll forget it. What I need to do as a marketer or seller is find a way of expressing a big idea in a way that's memorable. So in this case, I would do it this way. This was actually a real piece of art. There was an artist in London who developed on the 100th anniversary of the conclusion of World War I, so 2018, this incredible piece of art at Tower of London, where he had 888,246 poppies. And what's interesting is so many people came to this that for so long they weren't even able to take the exhibit down. But more interestingly, people were so moved. They were crying. Because you can't conceive what 888,000 is. The number's meaningless to us from that sense. But when he was able to help them visualize it, it moved them quite dramatically. Think about which treatment of the idea would be stickier to you and to your brain. So you always want to find ways, particularly of visualizing your value, particularly the big ideas in your value proposition. The fifth hallmark is the story must have a logical arc, logical narrative. Again, there's very deep brain science on this, but we do very badly with random information. We only store information. Our brains will only store information if we understand the flow of it. For example, if you read a book, chapter 5 makes sense because of chapter 4. You read the same book out of sequence, it makes no sense because the context for a piece of the argument has not been set up by the previous piece. Now, the good news is in all sales messages, there is an inherent flow. It's a symphony of three movements. Movement one, you have a problem and it's bigger and more serious than you think. Movement two, we are by far the best solution for that problem. Movement three, well, this is how we should move forward together. That problem, solution, action rubric is extremely powerful, and you would rarely want to deviate from it. Hallmark 5 is very simple, but sometimes easy to forget. Hallmark 6 is very easy to forget, which is you always want to lead to a reasonable action. If I had a first meeting with a client, I'm not going to say, hey, I'd like you to globally transform your entire sales messaging model, IBM. I start with a pilot, a reasonable ask, but make sure that's specific, that this plane should land, and make sure it lands in a reasonable place. And then finally, Hallmark 7 is different in nature. The first 6 hallmarks are about the message. Hallmark 7 is about the vehicle in which the message is communicated, or the document. And what you want to do is build a document specifically for retellability. Because again, science proves this, your unaided recall of anything will very, very rarely exceed 10%. Your unaided recall of any presentation will, if you're lucky, exceed 10%, and what you remember will be different to what the next guy remembers, which is a real problem. The handout or conversation guide or leave behind or whatever you call it, that's the key to bringing that number up to essentially 100%, and I'll prove it. I'm moving briskly through some fairly complex terrain here. Could you represent it? Without the handout, not a chance. You'd grab certain themes. With this handout, you could actually almost perfectly represent what I have just presented, because every important idea is here arranged in exactly the sequence in which I presented it. Do you see that? The big mistake we make is to build these crappy slides that don't do anything for retellability. They're dense, they're bloated, there's a load of stuff we don't cover, they're poorly sequenced. Most documents make retellability worse. No one would even ever try. If you build a great conversation guide, send it to the customer if you can. I will often mail these out if I'm having a meeting where that would be appropriate. And then the customer has engagement, a certain intimacy with you, their comprehension increases, as does their retellability. So that's the messaging model you're shooting for. You want to build messages that conform to those 6/7 hallmarks. So where I want to go now in this final 15, 20 minutes, so I want to talk about how you do this. How do you build a message this way? And this is gonna, let's grab my water. This is going to take us in a moment into the second part of your handout, but you don't need that right now. So I want to start by talking a little bit about the concept of value propositions and how you build them. The first thing I want to say is this is very widely misunderstood, right? Most people think your value proposition is what you do. Our value is what we do. That's completely, utterly, and wholly wrong. It has nothing to do with what you do. So forget that. First thing to say about a value proposition, it exists at one of 3 levels, and one is not better than the other. They all have their place. The first kind of message or value proposition would be, what am I thinking? Sorry, it's not a problem. At the product level. So there are product level value propositions. Can a value proposition be a product level? Yes. There's nothing wrong with that. This is a product level value proposition for one single product that improves electrical grid reliability. Now, if you aggregate a set of products, that gets you to what you would call a solutions message or value proposition. So the aggregate of products. So for example, this product does exist within a suite of products which are all to do with grid reliability. So sometimes you pitch a product, sometimes you pitch a solution. So there's a bigger problem in view, that the narrow product here solves the problem, in fact, of fuses blowing on a single power pole. Their solution here on grid reliability addresses all kinds of reasons why grids fail. Sometimes they fail because a tree branch blows down on the lines and so forth. Now, above this is a third type of sales message, which is essentially an aggregate of your solutions messages, and you would tend to call that a capability message. Now, the first thing you have to know is, what are you building here? Because companies get very, very hazy on this. You will have a large family, probably, especially for a big company like an IBM, a wide family of product messages. You'll then have a smaller number of solutions messages. You may only have 1 or 2 capability messages. So capability messages got to be an aggregate of everything that you do. The second thing you need to know about this is all to do with level. Product and solutions messages tend to be sold in at the operational level of the customer. Capability, solutions and higher end capability messages tend to be sold into the C-suite. Now, a lot of people come to us all the time saying, we want to build some C-suite messaging, and they think that they want to be talking about products. You never talk about products to the C-suite. You talk about capabilities. And the third thing to know about this is, this then helps you think about what problem you're solving. At the product level, you're looking at a very narrow problem. So the power poles outside these neighborhoods, the fuse keeps blowing and these 20 houses are losing power. That's the problem. At this level, you're talking about a totally different type of problem. If I was going to go and pitch reliability solutions to the C-suite of a utility, I'm going to say something like, here's where you are today as a utility. Here's where you're trying to get to, and this is why that journey's hard. And we've got a whole load of different solutions that can help you get from A to B. Do you see that? There's a completely different problem here. This problem is about, grid reliability on a Friday night in a thunderstorm. This problem is about where you're trying to go as a customer in the long term and how you're going to get there. So when we built messaging for companies like Cisco, the capability message is about the bank of the future, the hospital of the future, the school of the future. Product messaging is about, how do you make sure your kids can have an effective home learning environment? Do you see that? So the first thing you've got to really think through is, what level are you operating at? Because it's a completely different type of message. Now, from there then, let's talk about, how do you actually build the value proposition? So the first thing I need to do here then is explain what a value proposition is and is not. A value proposition, let me start here, is not what you do. And again, 9 out of 10 companies, when they say, well, here's our corporate value proposition, what they're basically showing me is a product catalog. That's not what a value proposition is. Remember, a value proposition can exist at any one of these 3 lessons. So let's put the slide up. So a value proposition, beginning of wisdom, right? That's a quote from Socrates. The beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms. A value proposition is very distinctly 2 things. It's this, okay? It is the economic and non-economic value of the problem that you solve. That's what a value proposition is, the economic and non-economic value of the problem you solve. In fact, if you wanted me to be grammatically perfectly correct, it's the economic and non-economic value of solving the problem that you solve. I'm the CEO of a company, smallish company, but I'm the CEO of a company. If you come to me with the argument that you're going to create value, the way I will interpret that is, what's the scale of the problem that you are going to solve for me? And what are the economic and non-economic consequences of solving that problem? In this example, by the way, I gave you of grid reliability. The economic value of solving the problem is that they get fined for downtime. They also, there are various penalties if the grid's down that the regulator imposes. So you made that go away. That's the economic value of this solution. The non-economic value is that my brand gets slammed because people go on Twitter to say the damn power's out again, and I get yelled at by the regulator. That's the non-economic value, that I now have brand that isn't being contaminated, and I have fewer really, really difficult conversations. So let's put the slide back up. So the first essential element of a value proposition is the economic and non-economic value of the problem you solve. Notice that's not what you do. And then the second element of it is essentially the ease with which that value is obtained. Okay, so the first element is the value of what you do to them, not what you do, but the value of what you do. And the second element is how easy is it for them to get that value. Now, let me explain that and let me show you how you build it. And this is the tool I want to give you. So I've got 10 minutes left and I'm going to walk you through this incredibly powerful tool which we've developed and which is the very heart of what we do. In any of our training or consulting, you see this tool showing up. It's called the pyramid of planned outcome. And what I want to do is I want to walk you through the pyramid that eventually led to the lighting solution message. And I want to show you how that value proposition gets created. So the first thing you want to do is figure out what is the customer problem you actually solve. And by the way, you probably think that's really easy. That's really hard. I've done thousands of meetings, said, well, what problem do you solve for your customer? And someone will say, well, what we do is we are a single one-stop shop. I'm like, what? Stop. What is the problem you solve for the customer? Well, we aggregate like, no, stop. What is the problem? I'm not okay, it's a joke. It's a game, it goes around and around and around. Companies are shockingly unable to articulate the problem they solve for the customer, but you have to do that. By the way, the key to doing this is give me a phrase that does not contain you, your name, your company's name, or a product name. So the problem that WebEx solves for is that their customers are unable to interact virtually in as seamless and efficient way as they would like. No mention of WebEx there, do you see that? So in this particular case, the problem they solve is, and I'm going to have to abbreviate it, you see it on the page there, is if you use lighting that is outdated, it can create a bunch of serious downstream consequences. So the first thing in your value proposition is you've got to define the problem. Otherwise, how can the customer ever get a sense of what the value of solving it would be? That's why you can't talk about yourself. You talk about their problem. So the first element here is figure out what is the problem that you solve, and this is written in here. Now, the second thing you do then is you are going in this message to be proposing an action that the customer is going to take, but the customer is not going to take the action because you want them to. No customer ever takes an action because a seller wants them to. They take an action because they want to, because they have a motivation. What's the motivation? It is to solve this problem, which is why you always start with the problem, then think about the action. Now we get to the most critical part of this, which is we know what the customer's problem is, and we're going to spend some time unpacking it or deconstructing it. You want to do what's called a root and fruit. So here's the problem, here's how it manifests, and in fact, in the lighting example, let me just draw it here because I still have space. You have this broad problem, let's call it LH, lighting hurts. Lighting hurts hospitals. But in fact, the way it hurts a hospital is interesting. It can hurt nursing productivity. It can actually hurt your brand. So nurses don't like working in dark environments. A shoddy, dark lobby is bad for your brand. It can create legal risk. People slip and fall in dark stairwells and they sue you. And for the sake of simplicity, I'll say there's a fourth one, which there is. It can actually hurt, believe it or not, clinical outcomes. Prescription dispensing errors happen in dark rooms. So what I've done is I've developed the customer's problem through that, which I call a root and fruit, looked at the core problem, and then established what are its different manifestations, is a good word. Now that's incredibly important. You'll see why in a second. My value proposition then is now this layer of the pyramid, and these are essentially your insights or big ideas. Now, where does that come from? Everyone talks about insights. Sandler talks about it. Challenger talks about it. Corporate Vision talks about it. Insights. What is an insight? Where does it come from? Think of an insight as a new belief. The dictionary definition of an insight is something you believe for the first time, having been presented with new information. So it's a new belief. Now, in human psychology, our decision-making process follows beliefs. I might pick this vacation because I think it's a really lovely hotel, the food is great, and the other activities are really interesting. That's 3 beliefs. But I might not pick this destination because it seems really hard to get to. It appears that it's not entirely safe, and I don't think this hotel is the nicest I've ever seen. You see, it's a different set of beliefs. In human beings, action is preceded by belief. In human beings, action is preceded by belief. Can I check something, Bryce? The monitors. Okay. Now, I want you to think about that one phrase. In human beings, action is preceded by belief. What does that mean? It means the single most important question in developing a sales message or value proposition is obviously, what does my customer need to believe? And not just in abstract what they need to believe, what would they need to believe to take this action? So your value proposition, which is the argument that you solve this problem better than anyone else, the way you get to that. So what I'm answering here is the question, how do you build this value prop? How do you develop these ideas? You focus intently on this question. What would my customer need to believe? Now, let's look at that in the last couple of minutes. In this message, the value prop was based on 3 critical ideas that were 3 beliefs that this customer would need to have. And they're on the page here, and I will not have room for them here in great detail. So I erase that and give myself a bit more space, I can. The first thing they would need to believe was that a lighting solution will fundamentally solve these problems, the ones I described here. Now, what you do with any insight is the idea goes here, if you're going to use this pyramid tool, and we have an online tool you can use if you want to learn about that. Then at the bottom of the pyramid is simply the proof of that idea. So this is what we call an insight path. It's a run of argument. It's a proposition, remember, a value proposition. So here's my proposition. Lighting a modern lighting solution will make all these problems go away. And then I prove it down here, and I can show various examples of nursing productivity improving, clinical outcomes improving, error rate declining, accidents avoided, brand enhancement. So there is the first big idea. Now this has a name, and I'm now going to get really into the deep end of the pool, because there are things called insight archetypes. There are types of ideas. And the name we give this is the framing insight. The framing insight is the fundamental idea that your solution solves the customer problem. And almost by definition, it's the first insight. It's the framing insight. Now, the framing insight argues that you can solve the customer problem. Well, why isn't that enough? Thank you so much. Drop the mic, meeting over. No. Because the customer would need to believe more than just that, which brings up the topic or the idea of what we call contingent insights. Again, this is fairly advanced thinking, but this is why it was a follow-up. Now, a contingent insight are the other things the customers would need to believe. And I'll perfectly illustrate this. So you're a hospital CEO of say a senior living facility, which is what this was built for. And I've just walked you through an argument that get lighting right and it'll make all these problems go away. Will you buy it? No. What if it's $1 billion? Like, okay, great, but I can't afford that. So a contingent insight, in other words, think about this phrase, other things that have to be true. The second insight is that this has an outstanding economic profile or ROI, which it does. And I'd walk through that at the bottom. For example, LED has, bulbs last 100,000 years. So you save on bulbs, you save on maintenance of having to replace bulbs. Your energy bill is lower, and there are actually government rebates for moving to more sustainable solutions. So again, proposition and proof, think about that, proposition and proof. So the first contingent insight or the second insight has great ROI. Would the customer buy from this? No. What if I said, like, it's going to solve all your problems it costs $1.29. Here's the thing, you've got to shut the hospital for 2 years while we do the retrofit. No. So what you do is, remember, what you're doing here is you're working back from the customer. You don't think ever about what you want to say. You're working on this question. You're building back from the customer. What does the customer need to believe? So the third thing they would need to believe, again, I have to abbreviate here, deployment is non-disruptive. That is a value proposition. So the value proposition understands, articulates the problem and its consequences, and you will often articulate this with an economic penalty. What's the economic pain? The second part of the value proposition is that you are the best solution for that. This, remember I said it's the economic and non-economic, actually let's put the slide up again, Bryce. The economic and non-economic value, so that was my framing insight. We make the core problem go away. But then the ease with which that value is obtained, in other words, how easy is it to deploy the solution, shows up here as these two contingent insights. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say to you. I said we were going to be moderately ambitious, but I'm hoping you were all able to track with this. Let me summarize. There are some consistent repeated problems we make in our messaging. They're toxic and they really damage outcomes, and those that damage kind of gets worse in a virtual environment where we're in a narrow environment. The way you solve that is you build a message that conforms to those 7 hallmarks. And so that's the what you do. But what I wanted to do was make room for an incredibly powerful tool, the pyramid of planned outcome, which is how you do it. So the pyramid has problem, action, insight, data, and illustration or proof. And if you can build the pyramid, you can build a pyramid for any sales interaction, product, solution, or capability. And that is not only what a value proposition is, but it's where it comes from and how you do it. I'm aware that this is a gallop through basically 15 years of thought on my part and work. I would encourage you that through Paradigm, we're offering a really nice, like 30% discount on the e-learning that unpacks all this stuff. And also we do offer a service to clients called a message MRI. We will look at your message and tell you what's wrong with it. That's normally something we charge $10,000, $12,000 for. But for the first half dozen people that would like us to do that for them on the call, we will do that for you for free. So if you want it, make sure you actually do want it. If you want it, let us know. We'll kind of take the first 5 or 6 or pick them at random or whatever we get. We'll do our analysis and then we'll do a debrief call with you to tell you what's good about the message you're doing right now, what are some areas you would fix, and possibly some recommendations how to move forward. So that's kind of right the time we needed to be. I hope that wasn't too brief or quick, but we can always have a follow-up conversation. So Rachel, let me hand back to you.
Thank you. This was so amazing. And I highly encourage everyone, if you want more, to check out the e-learning, because it really goes deep into this stuff. So thank you so much for your time, Tim. I appreciate it. So with that, I'm going to let Donna and Vicky from Paradigm, from my team, wave Vicky, take it over and do some Q&A. I see we have a couple questions in the Q&A, and then we have some others. Go ahead, Donna.
So Vicky, I'm going to hand it to you, but what occurred to me, Tim, as you were sharing this pyramid, which there's comments in the chat, and I completely agree. What an amazing, simple, not easy, simple tool. Love it.
Yeah.
The idea piece of the pyramid, it resolves a wide range of problems. It has a strong ROI, and deployment is non-disruptive. I think we all need to find our way into that, because that's pretty much the formula. Whether it's product or service, that to me is just, that's it. That's where you nail it.
If you want to see how deep the pool goes, we have spent the last year, if I had a call this morning with Merck in Paris on a module teaching this, there are only a finite number of insights, what we call insight archetypes. These are 3 common ones, ROI and deployment, but there are others. I'll give you an example. Another common archetype is that deploying this solution will support a range of other key strategies you're pursuing. Now, do you spot what that is? Huge prize if you spot it. That's your retellability insight. Because if I said to you, good example, this solution, remember, it's a low voltage, low maintenance, low waste, that will support a company's sustainability strategy. So what that means is, if I can tie my solution to other stakeholders, I can begin to tie my solution into the retailability meeting. And in fact, that's on your page. Notice I've already done that. I'm talking implicitly to the head of nursing, the head of legal, the head of brand, the head of operations, the head of sustainability, and the CEO. So often there will be a retailability insight, and that will often sound like deploying our solution is going to help you with a wide range of other strategies. And I literally start picking them off. So well spotted. Yes, there are insight archetypes. There's only a finite number of types of idea, but there are quite a lot of those. So that's an interesting observation.
Donna, shall I take it away?
Absolutely. Handing it to you, Vicky.
Hi, Tim. Wow, this is my second attendance here. And even this information is so deep and rich. And as Donna said, simple, but not easy to do. I mean, it's so many aha moments hearing it again. We have a question from Michelle Egan, who asked, she's actually with membership organizations. Would you approach this strategy any different from a membership organization versus a business?
No, not at all. We apply this model primarily with commercial sales organizations, but we have a very wide range, for example, of nonprofits that apply it, and they use it for donor messaging. Any of you, by the way, who are involved in a nonprofit, possibly on the donor relations side, donor development side, you really should take a look at this for that. Most donor messaging is horrible. But it's actually very relevant for membership organizations. I can think off the top of my head of 3 membership associations we have built messages with. SAMA, Strategic Account Management Association. And you know, what's the problem there? The problem SAMA solves for you, a big company, is if you lose a big strategic account, that's about the worst day of your year. And then there's a set of insights around how SAMA can help you solve that problem by identifying, communicating best practices, and networking with the people who can help you build a better strategic accounts association. That's literally just off the top of my head because I actually worked on that one. All membership organizations solve a problem for their members, right? There's something they're not doing well enough, and through access to this membership organization, they're going to do it better. So that's the problem. You're failing or you're underperforming on X. We're going to help you with that. And then the value proposition is, well, then what would you need to believe? Maybe they would need to believe that this membership organization provides me the absolute fastest, most efficient access to validated best practice. Boom, you sell it right off that. And I've seen membership organization results. I've seen their conversion rates double when they fix their messaging. Because often they just want to talk about what they do, which you can't do. Great question. Answer is yes. That was a long answer.
Excellent. And this is actually a great question from Claude Blanc. He was asking, you know, this is mostly product related. How does it work when you're selling services?
It's exactly the same. I mean, very much what I just said. I mean, the membership organization is selling a service. Let me think of an example. One of the services that this company offers is to monitor your grid and to see where outages are happening. Service, nothing physical about that at all. There's a digital remote monitoring. It happens out of this kind of weird, funky space age lab in Chicago. What's the problem? The problem is your grid's failing. You don't know when and you don't know why. Here's the solution. We are going to give you instantaneous visibility into what's happening and then post hoc diagnostics into why it happened. It's exactly the same construct. Problem, value proposition, solution based on a service. There is literally no intellectual distinction from a messaging standpoint between a product and service message. The only difference is with a product message, you may have a physical, tangible demonstration like, hey, hold this. But you can also do modeling or other types of demonstration of a service. But it's precisely the same. A lot of banks use our model, a lot of financial institutions. Arguably, there's no essential product that a bank sells. They sell electronic services, basically by definition.
Excellent. And we're coming up on time, so we just have, one last question. You mentioned that there are a few categories to identify your insights. Can you tell us a little bit more where we can learn about them?
This is honestly, the whole concept of insight archetypes is something quite recently that we've been developing. That is in some of our advanced training. And the way our training works is we have our core e-learning that gives you 80, 90% of what you would need right now. And then having taken the core training, then it's possible to access some of the more advanced graduate models. What we've been developing essentially is kind of a Disney Plus or a Netflix model where it's a subscription model. We're not selling training, but based on a number of users, you can actually then access everything that we teach. I'd be happy to chat to somebody if they had a specific question. We're developing a deeper thought on insight archetypes because it's a really interesting area. We think we've identified like 8 or 9 of them right now, but you know where I'm going with this, right? At some point, it might be possible for AI to configure a sales message based on understanding a customer without a human being having to be involved. That's really advanced. That's where we want to be in 5 years, but it's not where we are now. By the way, I don't have to jump immediately. If anyone wants to stick around, if you want to leave the room open for a few more questions, we can. Otherwise, though, I know we're close to time. So, but you guys let me know.
Don, I'm going to pass this off to you for closing remarks. I unfortunately am the popular girl here. I have another webinar that I'm hopping on that I'm presenting at. Tim, thank you so much for the amazing insights and for answering our questions. Always amazing. So thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. I hope that was enjoyable for people. And like I said, if someone wants to have their message analyzed, it's kind of a one-off thing we're doing for Paradigm. Just shoot us a note or let Rachel know. I think we did 10 reviews based on the first meeting. I think quite very well received. So anyway, Rachel, perhaps you can just remind people of that when you do the follow-up.
Absolutely. And I did have one question if you've written a book, not that I'm aware of, but do you plan to?
I've written 2 books.
Oh, you have. So show them up really high so we can all see them.
So the book you would want to get is the first book. I don't have it in front of me. The Compelling Communicator. Oh, there we go.
Oh, there we go.
This was the first book, The Compelling Communicator, which is the book on message architecture. This is a book called Mastering the Moment, which is the companion book on message delivery. This is not only about sales messaging. We train TED speakers. At Disney, we train executives in communication. These books cover all kinds of terrain: message design, message delivery. This is the kind of traditional piece that people think of presentation skills, which is the delivery. Although you'll like this, there's a chapter in here on eye contact and body language, and I won't open it. The chapter says, have some, don't be weird, that's it. That's all you get on eye contact and body language.
I've already failed. I can't do it.
You'll love these books. The one you'd start with, though, is The Compelling Communicator. And when we work with clients, they sort of automatically get the box set. Anyway, you can't buy the box set. We just have them at the office, but you would often get them as a part of working with us anyway.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Tim. And as a reminder to everybody, if you want to take Tim up on his offer for a complimentary messaging MRI, definitely shoot him an email. I just saw Julie put it in the chat again for you. You'll also get it in the email drip follow-up. I definitely encourage you to check out his e-learning. I have gotten a ton out of it, and I've had my entire team take it. And so I can't, give it enough credit. So thank you, Tim, for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rachel. And also, I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn. If you want to just connect with me on LinkedIn, that's another great way of connecting up.
Yes, thank you. And for everybody who's still here, don't miss our next roundtable with Steve Wiedemann, who is he literally wrote the text on SEO. So if you want to have your SEO mapping strategy and figure out your KPIs and how to hold your SEO team accountable in 2022, you do not want to miss this next event. And lastly, I'll invite all of you to our NJBIA and our virtual networking event, Table for Four, which is the 4th Monday of every month at noon. It's coming up this Monday. So be sure to check that out. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Tim. I appreciate it. And I hope to see everybody in a couple more weeks.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Rachel.